Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Daria. I'm an exhibit intern and museum facilitator for the Sandy Spring Museum. And so I'll be kind of hosting and moderating the event tonight. And to start, I just have some statements from the museum. So first, to increase the accessibility of all our programs, our virtual programs will now have closed captioning. If you would prefer not to see the closed captioning, please hit the More button on the bottom of your screen and click on Hide Subtitles. And also, if everyone, when not speaking, could please mute their audio to provide just a smoother experience for everyone. Thank you. And during these very difficult times that we have experienced as individuals and as a country, the Sandy Spring Museum too has experienced challenges, grappling with the role we play in a system that benefits some at the expense of others. Sandy Spring Museum stands firmly with those fighting against the racism, structural disadvantages, and systemic injustice that have oppressed Black people in the United States for hundreds of years. The United States was built on discriminatory practices that were codified in our legal system, beginning with the dehumanization of Native people, followed by enslaving Black people in bondage as property for the financial benefit of those of white European ancestry. Sandy Spring Museum stands on land that was once a plantation where Black people were enslaved. We recognize that the museum is a beneficiary of a historically unjust system and are committed to working towards dismantling systems that perpetuate racism and discrimination in order to build a just, equitable society. Great. So now to kind of introduce the event and the show. Inspired by Malcolm, A Passion for Shino is a juried exhibition featuring original ceramic works by 47 artists from across the nation. And Malcolm Davis was a ceramicist known for his use of Shino glazes, which is a family of glazes from 16th century Japan. So as the show is inspired by him, all of the works in the show feature the use of Shino glazes. And tonight we will begin with opening statements by Judy Davis, Malcolm's wife and partner for over 50 years. And we will then watch Malcolm's closing lecture at the National Council on Education for the Ceramic Arts during their 2010 conference. And finally, we'll have closing statements by Shoji Satake, who is an associate professor of ceramics at the School of Art and Design at West Virginia University. And he'll discuss the legacy that Malcolm has left and a current project that he is working on. So the statements from Judy are pre-recorded, so I'll be sharing those. 1 second.
Inspired means that you give life to people. Welcome. There are a number of events this summer at the Sandy Spring Museum, all under the umbrella entitled Inspired by Malcolm, A Passion for Shino. Malcolm was an internationally recognized master Shino ceramicist. He was my husband and partner for over 50 years, a teacher, a creator, and friend of many, many people in the US and in Europe. What we will be looking at today shortly is a final address about Malcolm's life, which we hope is inspiration and brings life to you. So, inspired by Malcolm, a passion for Shino. What does that mean? Passion is a word whose roots relates to some kind of suffering that cannot be quelched, that needs tending, something that you need to care for. And what is Shino? Shino is a decoration, a glaze. There's some examples here. Shino is a glaze that developed out of Japan in the 16th century. at the time when the tea ceremony was being developed, and they needed to have vessels to enable you to have tea. Uniquely Japanese, at that time, ceramics were imported from China and Korea, and they were very metered, disciplined, and exact. Shino glaze is exactly the opposite. It's complete surprise every time you apply it and take it out of the kiln. You cannot repeat it, period. Don't try. So there's a little capsule of Malcolm's life. In 2010, Malcolm was asked to give the closing address to the National Council of Education for Ceramic Arts, which is an annual meeting where 5, 6, sometimes 7,000 people come, believe it or not, every year. Anybody who's related to clay can come and is invited. Gallery owners, individual artists, professors, writers, you name it, come. They show their wares, they see each other, it's a gathering, okay. In 2010, quite by chance, in the way that Malcolm discovered, and he says clay found him, he was invited to give the closing address to this meeting. He called it, "How Did I End Up Here?" I wanted this video to be shown because it's really an interesting model for anybody's life to follow what their passion is. Malcolm vehemently believed that if you really wanted to be an artist, you could do that. You all know people who say they can't draw or they can't sing. And I agree with him completely that both are wrong. I'm a singer, and there's a whole school of choral directors who have built their life and their choruses around the fact that everybody can sing and sing well. In the same way, Malcolm, without formal art education, became who he is. In the video, in the address, he talks about touching clay for the first time when he was 40 years old, and it changed his life. And I would add that we all thought he'd lost his mind. And in fact, I think he had part of it. He was following his heart. So this final address about Malcolm's life, which by chance, again, just like he discovered Shino glaze, his Shino glaze recipe, the year before he died, he talked about his life and his journey. And so we present this today for you to be inspired and for you to find and do what you simply cannot not do. For all of these events, I wish to thank the following. First of all is Friends House Senior Retirement Community, in which I live and where Nancy McIntyre lives, whose idea this was. Sandy Spring Museum and Robin Zeke, who was at the inception of the idea for all of these programs, who's a resident artist at the museum. Matt Heilich, who is our juror of our exhibition for the exhibition artists, and all the co-sponsors. There are a lot of people. Myself, Baltimore Clay Works, the Clay Co-op, District Clay, and Montgomery Potters. And the exhibition dates are June 11th when it opens, and when it closes, September the 5th.
So, all right, so now we're going to try streaming the speech.
Malcolm, you're right. It's just Judy, you, and I here. Nobody else showed up. I have to tell you a quick story about when I first called Malcolm back in August to ask him to do this talk. The first thing out of his mouth was, "You guys usually get somebody famous to do this, don't you?" And then came, "Well, no one will come. What do I have to say that anybody wants to listen to?" Well, Malcolm, we all know you, and if we don't know you, we know of you. And we know of you, the ubiquitous Malcolm Davis Shino. How many of you out there have a bucket of that in your studio somewhere? So it took me about a month to talk him into this. I thought I'd tell you that before I start. A few thoughts about Malcolm Davis. This is at least his second life. Before Clay, he was a campus minister and somewhat of an activist. But in 1973, at the age of 40, Malcolm found Clay, and he's been passionate about it ever since. He's won numerous awards and prizes, way more than I could talk about here. He has exhibited in more spaces or places than half of us here, and I'm sure that's going to continue, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art and Craft show, the Strictly Functional several times, Feats of Clay even more than that, just to name a few. He's been an artist in residence at the Clay Studio here in Philadelphia, Baltimore Clay Works, Greenwich House Pottery, this is their 100th year anniversary, by the way, Red Star and Northern Clay Center, and many more. His work is included in some of the finest private and public collections globally, including the Yixing Ceramic Museum, the Shine Joseph Museum of Ceramic Art at Alfred, and the American Museum of Ceramic Art in Pomona, California. He's been featured in more publications than the other half of us here, and combined, including Robin Hopper's book, Staying Alive, Ceramics Monthly, time and time again, the Studio Potter more than several times, and internationally in Ceramica from Spain, and the Ceramic Review from England. Malcolm has also taught workshops and lectured widely throughout the United States and abroad. And he's curated exhibitions. By the way, if you haven't seen Shino Redux 2010, you didn't get to see it live and in person, go online and find it. It's truly an amazing show. A ceramic artist extraordinaire, a great wit, and a really fine person. Please join me in a warm welcome for Mr. Malcolm Davis.
God, that was impressive. The earth binds us potters to one another. Score, slip, and we're joined together throughout history. None of us are here today without one another. So I'd like to begin by paying homage to each of you and to this wonderful community of makers and creators. And of course, I want to pay homage to my teachers, my mentors, and my enablers. And we're going to push a button now. There's my wife, Judy. What? Mike, is that what you mean? Oh, I can tell the difference. My wife, Judy, without her support and sacrifice, encouragement, and nagging, I would not be a potter today. Cynthia Bringle, Mary Nyberg, I don't know who's next, Bob Turner, Karen Carnes, and Michael Zakin, David Leach, Debbie Bedwell, Angela Fina, Elvira Peak, Robin Hopper, Vivica and Otto, and Jerry and Julie Williams. I've been waiting a very, very long time to thank all of these people publicly. Thank you. wherever you are. And then there's the clay. None of us would be here today without all of our struggling and surviving and making and creating and conferencing and meeting and drinking and dancing if it weren't for this living earth that sustains us, seduces us, and keeps us growing. Thanks to the clay and to all of those workers and makers throughout the millennia who have transformed the earth into beautiful and useful objects. They paved the path that leads us here today, and they made it possible for us to do what we do. So thanks must be given to our foremothers and forefathers in clay. Thanks to them. So how did I end up here? That's the title I chose for this lecture. I've forgotten how many NCECAs I've attended, but I remember the first one. It was in 1979. It was in State College, Pennsylvania, in conjunction with Supermud. I was living in D.C. and brand new to clay, and I had just come back from a workshop with Cynthia Bringle in Penland. And Cynthia was in D.C. and staying with us for an opening at the American Hand in Georgetown. And during the opening, it started to snow, and it snowed, and it snowed, and it really, really snowed. And by halfway through the opening, we decided to leave. And by the time we got home, only a matter of blocks, we were snowed in. It was the blizzard of 1979. Well, Cynthia was very nervous because she was hot to trot and to get on the road and to go to Penn State. And she was going to NCECA. I had never heard of NCECA, but she told me about it. And I said, well, why not? It sounded, D.C. was shut down. I couldn't do any work there. So I bummed a ride, and I went to State College, Pennsylvania, to my first NCECA, 1979. I had not heard of NCECA when I arrived. I had not registered. I had no room. Cynthia's room was full. But she was so generous, and she's not here today for me to thank her, that she gave me the floor. And I spent my first NCECA sleeping in her closet. Thank you, Cynthia. So I had no idea there were so many potters in the world, and they were all seemed to be right there in State College, Pennsylvania. I remember very little about the conference. The only thing I remember were the demonstrations. I didn't know any of the people at the time, but on the stage there's this woman, this little woman. She had a kerchief on, a scarf on her head, and she was sitting at the wheel, and she was throwing from a mound of clay a beautiful pot without a bottom. So I was stunned by the vitality and the scale of this pot, but I had no idea why in the world anybody would throw a pot without a bottom. And so when she finished, she stood up, she cut it off, she grabbed the pot off the wheel and threw it on the floor and stretched it and stretched it and stretched it. I was aghast. I actually thought it blasphemous to take that beautiful pot and throw it on the floor. This woman must be mad. But at the end of the demonstration, there stood up on the stage the most remarkable pot I had ever seen up to that point in my life. Thank you, Betty Woodman. 30 years later, I wonder what magical memories we will all take home with us from this conference. I will remember sitting in my room and practicing this damn speech. But I wonder what you will remember 30 years hence. In 30 years, what will you remember from this weekend? I won't remember anything, but I hope you do. I'm here, and then the question I kept asking them and asking myself, and how did I end up here? Not only on this stage, but on this stage as a potter. And I'm here on the stage because NCECA asked me. I don't know really why they asked me. I don't even know why I agreed. But I am sure that there have a lot of second thoughts at this point because I have been a very high-maintenance presenter. 2 weeks ago, my slides were slides, like in a carousel, slides. So it's been a very fast learning curve. And I have to thank Steve Hilton and Dory Nielsen for all of their patience and help, and Marco Fields and the AV crew who promised to make me look good. Those who preceded me to give this closing lecture have been major figures in our field, and it makes me really nervous to be here. I'm very intimidated, and there's no way that I could fill their shoes. I'm not an academic, and I will avoid all academics. Art speak. There will be no talk of art versus craft or skill versus intent. And the only mention of postmodernism is now. It's done. I am a potter. And I suspect I am the first studio potter that has ever been asked to give the closing lecture. And I have nothing more to offer you than my story, my journey, my transfiguration by the clay and by fire. If you've heard of me at all, it's probably as that crazy Shino addict, hooked on smoke and soot, obsessed with trapping those elusive carbon molecules in the early melting soda ash. Several years ago at the Minnesota Pottery Tour, a woman came up to me and looked at my name tag, and she said, "Oh my God, Malcolm Davis, I thought you were a glaze." So I am here. I think this is why I accepted this assignment. I'm here in the flesh to say I am not a glaze. And I am more than a name on a bucket. I'm a man with a history and a story to tell, so I'm going to tell it now. Our journeys of transformation. We all have journeys of transformation, and the clay hasn't transformed each and every one of us. We came to NCECA, each of us have come here along a different path, and each on our own journey. But we all are here because of our common love for and addiction to this material called clay. Whether makers or users, potters or sculptors, installation artists, collectors or critics, shop owners, gallery owners, museum directors, authors or scholars, it is the material of clay that has attracted us, that inspires us, and that captures our imaginations and our passions. Some of us are nearing the end of this journey, and others are midstream, and many, many of you are at the very beginning. But NCECA brings us all together from all over the world, both young and old, as comrades and colleagues. And I want to thank NCECA for being a forum and a framework, a source of knowledge, of information, of criticism, for providing a context that we can come together and forge friendships. It has been said of me that I came to clay through the back door, that I didn't pursue the normal channels and never paid my dues. And actually the dues have been paid. But they were right. I didn't follow any prescribed, accepted steps to reach this place. For me, it was one step at a time. Each door opened the next. There was a lot of luck, a lot of serendipity, and a lot of good fortune. But I have no MFA, I have no BFA, I have no formal training. In fact, the only art class I ever took, one, was in high school. And I wanted to get an easy A so I could give the graduation speak, the valedictory, right? Well, I didn't get that A, and I didn't give the speech. I didn't get a C. I got an F. I flunked art. And as I like to say, a flunking F. My friends will know what I'm trying to say. From then on, I avoided art at every encounter. I was 40 years old when I touched clay for the first time, and it changed my life forever. So I want to speak here today on behalf of all of you who came to clay late in life, having completed your educations. There are a lot of you. After you've completed your educations and had your lives, your families, your jobs, your careers, your homes, I want to speak on behalf of all of you who came in through the back door or the side door, who snuck in when no one was looking, who avoided formal training and technical training. I am one of you, and we are everywhere. So how did I end up here? It was not in the plan, I assure you. Born in 1937 in Virginia's Tidewater, on the shores of the Chesapeake, I knew nothing of clay. Oh, God, the images are down here. I knew nothing of clay. Our family's dishes were Lenox, not a handmade pot in the lot. I went to William & Mary, and I didn't even know there was an art department there until decades later. And from there, I graduated in 1959 with a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics. And that was the year the Russians sent Sputnik into space. And the space war was on, and mathematicians were in great demand. So I had job offers up the kazoo. And of course, I picked the one that offers me the most money, and packed my bags and headed to Hartford, Connecticut to become an insurance actuary. Life number one. Plan number one. Climb the golden ladder up to the executive suite and rule Hartford as an insurance magnate. Why not? However, when they showed me my office, it was a cubicle in the middle of a room, stacked with this huge stack of massive black ledgers and an equally massive black manual adding machine. 1950, what was this? Anyway, I knew something was dreadfully wrong. Dreadfully wrong, so 3 days later, I was gone. That was plan one. Plan two, seminary, why not? Made sense. The life of a bishop would be almost as good as that of an insurance magnate. Plus, there were costumes, rings, all these little perks. So early on, I entered Union Theological Seminary in the fall of 1959 in New York City on Morningside Heights. And I immediately joined the Social Action Committee because I wanted to meet women. And I figured there'd be a lot of socializing, social action, and action, a lot of action. I told them I wasn't going to pick my nose. Anyway, I was dead wrong. The Social Action Committee was a bunch of guys committed to social change and social justice. And within weeks, I was picketing Woolworths in Harlem to protest this policy of segregated lunch counters in the South. And before I knew it, I had become a radical. And radicals didn't become bishops. I needed another plan. So I graduated, I married my seminary sweetheart, I got ordained in the United Church of Christ, and became a campus minister. Moving to Washington, D.C. in 1965 as the ecumenical chaplain at the George Washington University. The 60s were exciting, turbulent, transformative years. Richard Nixon was in the White House down the street. Across from my office was the national headquarters of the Selective Service System, the draft, and General Louis B. Hershey, if anyone's old enough to remember. And J. Edgar Hoover was chairman of the Board of Trustees of the university. So we were literally in the belly of the beast. I soon joined the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and became one of the few white volunteers to work with Martin Luther King and his staff to plan the 1968 March on Washington, the 1968 Poor People's Campaign. But Martin was murdered on April the 4th in Memphis, almost 42 years to the day from this very moment, April the 4th. And all hell broke loose. Rebellions broke out across the land. Washington, D.C. was in flames and under curfew. Federal troops and tanks patrolled our streets and our neighborhoods up and down with their turrets aimed in our bedroom windows. But the Poor People's March continued, and the first mule train arrived in Washington 3 weeks later. Thousands came by car, by foot, by train, by bus, by mule trains and huge horse-drawn caravans from all over the country. On the National Mall, they built a shanty town of tents and cardboard boxes from recycled, scavenged plywood and scrap metal, and they called it Resurrection City. And they camped there for 6 weeks. They were unemployed, welfare mothers, welfare activists, migrant laborers and farm workers, nursemaids and gardeners, blacks and Hispanics, Native and white Americans from all over the country, all demanding to be heard, to be respected, demanding jobs, income, and economic justice. It was a multiracial army of the poor. And it rained, and it rained, and it rained. And the conditions were miserable. And in June, Bobby Kennedy was killed. And it seemed like all hope was extinguished. And many of us became disillusioned and turned to more radical solutions. My campus ministry was renamed the People's Union. And we joined the mobilization against the war in Southeast Asia. We joined the Women's Liberation Movement, the Black Panther Party. And later, we joined more radical pre-communist caucuses. We wanted to remake the world. We wanted to end racism and sexism, to end imperialism and militarism, to stamp out homophobia and all chauvinisms. We wanted to create institutions that serve the people and not profit. My campus ministry ran a draft counseling center and started a network of food co-ops, helped to organize free health clinics in the inner city all over D.C., and was involved in the formation of the Rape Crisis Center. It was a heady time, full of energy and hope. We knew we were going to build a new society. We knew we were going to create a society of, for, and by the people. Unfortunately, the old society had other ideas, and it wasn't about to give up any power or control. My office was bombed. Our house was bugged. There were weeks that we had helicopters just circling our backyard. And out front, we had our FBI agent sitting in his car, reading the paper and drinking coffee. And I later found out that I was one of the 5 Davises on Richard Nixon's notorious enemies list. American citizens to be detained and tagged for detention in the event that Richard Nixon would declare a state of national emergency. I was approaching 40 years old. I was already burned out and frightened. So one night, a neighbor asked me to go to an adult education meeting. I had 5 or 6 meetings that night. I didn't want to go to any of them, so I went. And it was just, I didn't have to do anything, and it was not a meeting. It was going to be like a lecture, I thought. When we arrived, the instructor was at the door, and he gave everybody a bag of clay. I didn't know anything about clay. I was in my 40s. I had never touched clay in my life, and I wasn't about to touch clay that night. So I went and sat down. In fact, I thought it was counter-revolutionary, the fact that grown adults would be spending an evening playing with clay when this country was waging an illegal and immoral war in Southeast Asia. I just found it appalling. So I sat there and just judged them, and then but they didn't seem to care. There they were, all of these counter-revolutionaries standing around the table, slabbing and stretching and coiling and paddling and pinching and pressing and creating objects out of nothing. And I must say, I was intrigued. And I gathered my courage, and I went up and I asked for my bag of clay. And I took it out, and I rolled what I later learned was a coil. And I formed it over a bowl that was upside down on the table. And when I turned it upside down, and the coils came out, and I had a bowl. I had made something. It was concrete, it was tangible, it was real, it was immediate. It was nothing like saving souls or overthrowing capitalism. And I could hardly wait until the next class to take the next step. And at the end of the session, I went home with my very own glazed-fired soap dish, which is on our kitchen counter to this day. When I first took that slimy, greasy, wet ball of clay out of that plastic bag, I knew that something had snapped. I knew that something was out, and it wasn't just the clay. I knew right then and there that I was a potter. I might have been a potter all my life. I might have been a potter in another life, but how would I have ever known if I hadn't touched that ball of clay? The problem, of course, was I didn't know how to make a pot. Sort of an awkward situation. So I began to take classes, every possible class that I could take. I went to Haystack that summer in 1973. And in 1968, I spent the summer in Penland as a weekend cook. And one of the sessions was taught by a porcelain potter who got rid of all the stoneware in the studio and made us all work with porcelain. And bingo, transformation. I was a porcelain potter. Right then and there, never touched stoneware again. Finally, in 1982, at age 45, I resigned my job as a campus minister. I rented a house and studio down in Penland and spent 3 years trying to learn to make pots, while Judy stayed back home in D.C. and supported us. I didn't know how to fire a kiln, and I had no idea how to start a business, but I knew I wanted to make pots. I didn't want to play at it. I wanted to make pots. If I was going to give up my life and my career and my housing allowance and my insurance and my health insurance and my annuity and all of that, I was going to be serious. I had to do it. I wanted to make pots. I wanted to make the best pots I could. I wanted to make useful pots. I wanted to make honest pots. I wanted to make my pots. I spent 3 years in that basement studio working around the clock, weekends and holidays. I had only 500 pounds of porcelain, and I worked it until all life was gone from it. I threw it, reprocessed it, threw it, and reprocessed it, keeping only those few things that I liked, but not very often. I really resisted allowing myself to fall in love with each piece. Somehow I knew that each step, each pot was a part of a long discovery and of finding my way. I think I fired one biscuit that entire first year. The most difficult thing for me was to clear out all that strong influence from all those people I had studied under so that my own spirit would emerge in my pots. So I decided I would just take one form and work on it for a month. So I chose the tea bowl. For 1 month, I threw tea bowls off of a hump of clay, still working with that 500 pounds of clay. And at first it was very exciting. I mean, tall ones. I tried to make everyone different. Tall ones and wide ones and skinny ones and fat ones and, concave ones and full ones and summer bowls and winter bowls. And then I ran out of ideas, and then I got terribly bored. Who would have ever thought a month could be so long? It was like 10 days and I was ready to quit. But I had 20 more days to go, so I persevered, and that's when things started to happen. When I was no longer trying to be fresh, new, and all of that, something inside took over, and new things began to emerge, new pots, my pots. So slowly, pots began to pile up, and I was using up that 500 pounds of clay, so I had to buy more clay. That meant I had to sell pots. That meant I had to learn how to fire the kiln. So I learned how to fire the kiln, sort of. I fired, for 3 years, I was firing that kiln, making what I thought was great pots, at the time. And I thought I was, because I was firing in a gas kiln, I thought I was reducing them, but actually they were all oxidized. I thought, that if the electric was oxidized, gas was reduced. So how did I know that you could oxidize a gas kiln? But I liked those pots. I can't get them again because now I know what a reduction is. Anyway, so then I had to start applying to shows if I was going to sell things, and then all of that stuff, slides, applications, and getting rejected. Having to deal with rejections, weekly rejections, regular rejections, steady rejections. It's not confidence building. So anyway, I finally got into a show. It was an ACC, American Craft Council show in Dallas, Texas, as it turned out, the last one they ever had. And it's not my fault. It was Palm Sunday weekend, so I decided I was going to make Easter eggs. So I threw all these little closed forms off the hump, decorated them, and sold them in little baskets from Pier 1. And they were a great hit. But one night when I was tired and I was making them, I just trimmed like 24, 30 of these little buggers, and I was carrying them across the floor in my ware board, tripped, and they all went flying, all over the place, plop, 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 plop. And I was, how many hours had I been trimming those buggers? So I sat down on the floor and just cried and cried. And then I noticed they hadn't popped open. They're all over the floor with these little, it was like one of these sculptures we've been looking at. Like all over these, it was an installation piece. I didn't realize it until tonight, right now. Anyway, so I thought, wow, I'm not going to waste them. So I turned them into little bud vases, cut a hole in the back to hang them on the wall, and a little top to put the posies in. I took them off to the trade show, and they were a hit. I sold out, and I came home with order for 600 of those things. I spent the next month in my studio throwing little closed forms and throwing them all over the studio. You had to kind of maneuver, like walk around. Because, you know, I had to leave them there until they set up and stuff, or I would have ruined them. So I was like a, you know, obstacle course. That's a lesson there. Be careful what you ever take to a trade show. Eventually, I came up with a production line. I called it my white shit. And it was porcelain pots, wet-faceted while still on the wheel. I slip-trailed decoration with my throwing slip, and I fired them with my clear glaze. So it was white on white and white, and they were quite nice. And I went off to my first major trade show in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I came home with $40,000 worth of orders. I was so excited. I had it made. I had orders from Macy's and shops and galleries and all over the country. Finally, I had hit the big time. I was going to be able to support her. Judy could stop working. So that never happened. She's still working. When I told my landlady of my success, she said, well, she smiled and said, well, that's wonderful, but you can't make them here because I don't want I don't want to use this as production pottery. You have to find your own place. So there I was, out on my ass with $40,000 worth of pots to make and nowhere to make them. And this is part of the story of how we survive and how we keep going. We can't do it without some luck and good fortune and friends. And that came to me at that point in my life in the form of Debbie Bedwell. And Debbie was able to get me a grant from the NEA to spend a year at Baltimore Clay Works on a residency. And I was able to begin filling those orders. But it didn't take me long to get very tired of making pots to order forms, to other people's demands. Just didn't work for me. Plus, kiload after kiload after kiload of that white shit got very, very boring. And if there was one iron spot on it, nobody would take it. So I was looking for another surface. One of the other potters at Clayworks had been experimenting with something called Shino. I knew of Shino because Angela had worked with it and said, don't do it. You will never be able to sell it. But there they were in the trash, were 24, 25 little pellets of dried up Shino tests. She had them in little Dixie cups. She'd thrown them in the trash, unlabeled. So I took all these 24 different tests, put them in a little bucket, added enough water, and I put a jar in it, and I rolled it. And so I could coat that jar with this mix of Shino glazes. And when I put it in a kiln, somebody else was firing the next kiln, and when it came out of that kiln, I was amazed. It was dynamite, and it's on the screen, right? It was my first Shino pot, and it was full of, it was salmony and orange and peachy and had all these crystals, these black and gray spots, big ones and little ones. I had no idea what it was. Someone said it was carbon traffic, but that meant nothing to me. I'd never heard the word before in my life. I didn't care. I just wanted more. So that kicked me off on my eternal search to get that surface again, and I'm still trying. I've never gotten it again. And if you think I'm going to tell you how to do it, you're wrong. Not here and not now. But you can come to La Meridiana this fall with me in Tuscany. We're going to trap soot. We're going to trap Tuscan soot, and we're going to do it. So, in 1985, I set up my own studio at the top of a remote West Virginia mountaintop at the end of a winding, dirt, steep road. I thought my journey was over. I had a studio of sorts. I had a kiln, and I could just make pots. How wonderful. So these are a couple of shots of my studio in 1985 as I bought it. The white building is my kill shed. I'm firing my very first kill. You can see the flame in there. The red building was my studio. It used to be a pigsty. It had no heat, no floor. It had a few windows, and I worked in there until just recently. Next slide. That's the inside. The only part that was not dirt was where the wheel was, and eventually I knew I needed another studio when the floor went through, and I was sitting at the wheel, and all of a sudden the chair went through the floor, and the wheel was at my nose level, and I was in the hole. So the groundhogs had built worlds under there, and then on the we have Emma. Ethel, not Emma. Ethel is my black snake who lived in those hollow red bricks. And she left every morning at 10, came back every day at 5. She was 8 feet long. And 5 years ago, I finally was able to build me a proper studio. And that's the next slide. And it's nothing fancy, but it's got a floor. It's got windows. It's got heat, it's got running water, and it has a toilet. No. Ethel has not joined me. Yeah, very sad. I don't know what happened to her. So, once I got to West Virginia and I started trying to make a living off of my pots in my own studio, that's when all the shit started to happen, and all of these problems that we potters know all too well started happening to me. Blown up pots, S-cracks, running glazes all over the shelves, crawling, crazing, pop-outs, pinholes, dunting, shivering, slaking. I mean, no one ever told me about these things. It was not in any of my workshops. And so, and then there were bad backs, of course. And there was that time that I washed all of my shelves with my clear glaze. And there was a time when UPS went off the side of a mountain with $50,000 worth of holiday pots. And then I could go and tell horror stories maybe next year. We can just have a thing on what can go wrong, why you should not be a potter. And in 1994, there was a major studio fire. But my greatest personal struggle, and about the fire, is Janet Leach told me, that's wonderful, because that means you're a potter. No potter can be a potter unless they burn down their studio at least once. Bernard Leach burned his down twice. But my greatest personal struggle over the years has been to come to terms with the fact that I left the active struggle for social justice to make pots and dishes for the privileged, adding more clutter to the cosmic dump. Look at the mess we're in. We're waging a war in two lands, two foreign lands, a global war on terror, an economy in shambles, millions losing their jobs, their housing, their health care. Corporate giants control the Congress and the media, and the fragile planet that we love so dearly and exploit so greedily is showing signs of imminent demise. We don't have a lot of time left on this planet Earth. And here we are playing in the mud. Why do we make pots? Why do we work with clay? How do we justify it? Does it serve any useful social function? Is it merely self-indulgence, escapism, egotism, privilege? Is our work with clay just selfish, useless, and superfluous? Are we fiddling while Rome burns? These are the questions I struggle with daily. And I was preparing these remarks several months ago. Word came of the escalating catastrophe in Haiti. And so this conversation became more urgent and more inadequate. What difference does clay make anyway? What difference does clay make? What difference does clay make? I mean, I asked myself over and over. So I sent that question in an email to about 30 potter friends, critics, curators. And the response was overwhelming. And it's clear that clay has made a difference in all of their lives. But I continue to grapple with this question as I continue to make pots. And I really can do no other. For me, this journey is not one of choice, but one of destiny. What we do with the clay, and what we create with our hands, and what we offer up from our spirits may not end racism or end injustice, but it just may help keep the culture human. A recent email from a friend read, "Art cannot cure cancer, but art restores hope." Perhaps that's one of the things that we have to offer, hope. When I was handed that first dirty ball of clay, I was at the time deeply involved in the struggle for social change and social justice. But my encounter with clay was dramatic. It was radical. It was life-changing. Something unknown within me was touched, exposed, awakened, and set free. There was no turning back, and I didn't want to turn back. I found a reservoir within that was deeper than I ever imagined I had, a creative spirit that could lead me to new places if I trusted it and just let go. I found within me a surprising and unknown sense of form, of grace, of elegance. I found part of myself that I had never met. Clay found me without my seeking it and grabbed me and took over my life. I was no longer the same man. And this same is true for most of you in this room. Clay has changed each of us in its own way and given each of us our own journey of transformation. I'm now 72 years old, and I'm still making pots and still wondering how it happened. I have no idea how this happened. I can barely recall being anything else but a potter. So I think I was going to pause right now and share with you some of my pots very quickly before I conclude. What is on the screen? Nothing. What will be on the screen if I push this button? Emma the Red, our West Virginia stray. Emma, she's named after Emma Goldman, of course, and she's home waiting for us to return. Some of my wife's Shiburi silk work. I just wanted to share with you the real artists in our family. And the pots. My first teapot. My first porcelain pots. They each weighed 5 pounds. They were 2 inches high, and they had S-cracks through every one of them. Some fool bought them, and I thought they were great because if anybody buys them, that makes them good. My first porcelain teapot, I wanted the most perfect, beautiful porcelain pot you'd ever, of course, the cone packs melted on the spout. How many times has that happened? Of course, I flunked art, so I wasn't about to do brushwork on pots, so I carved them. And then we carved them. And then I became aware of David Leitch's work, and I started doing fluting and faceting. Then I went to Alfred one summer to their summer program, and in the pot shop across the wall was a big sign that said, "A pot without soul is just clay around a hole." And I got home and I looked at my pots and I said, "That's just clay around a hole. It looks like it was made by a machine. It's just too perfect." So then I started making pots, throwing pots, and faceting them while they were still on the wheel, still being thrown, so that they would be fresher and have a little more vitality, life, energy in them. So these were early on. At some point, another one of those serendipitous moments that break in for no reason at all and change your life and open up doors and that make it possible to be what you want to be. And that, for me, was an invitation from Karen Carnes to exhibit at the Old Church Cultural Center. It's a pottery invitational that she's been curating for 35 years in Demarest, New Jersey on the first weekend in December. And it's the most magnificent venue of functional pots in the land. And I have been fortunate to be a part of it for 30 years. Thank you, Karen. I'm just going to, I meant to take these out and I forgot to, but anyway, at one workshop I did with Karen Carnes, she had us work with 1 pound of clay, 10 of them, and make 10 lidded vessels. And we were supposed to take 10 of them and look at the one which was the most successful in terms of scale, proportion, form, and all of that. It was a form workshop. And take that one of the 10, the best, that we liked the best, and translate it with 5 pounds of clay. Well, I couldn't work with 5 pounds of porcelain, so I went the other direction. So I started making these little covered vessels off the hump, and they were about 2 inches high. And so I couldn't sell them. I took them to shows, and I tried to sell them as cocaine jars, but no one would dare do it publicly, buy them. Just a pocket comb, so I could get 12 or 15 in each pocket. Anyway, let's keep going. This is the white shit. It was a production line of just white pots, and they did very well. I mean, I could reproduce them if I didn't get iron spot. Firmly, he said, not to grimace. And then you saw the first Shino pot that I did. When I discovered Shino, and when I glazed that pot, with a glaze made out of 24 tests. There was no recipe. So I spent the next several years testing, trying to come up with a recipe that was going to give me those spots, that jar. Of course, I didn't know that I would never get it because of the way carbon trapping works. You never can ever get the same thing twice. So these are just, I'm quickly going to go through some slides, early pots with my early Shinos up until today. just, oops. I don't know what they look like on that screen, but oops, I'm pushing this thing wrong. Oops. I didn't mean to do that. You can't go, oh, you can go back. There we go. Those young people are much better at this than I am. Oval teapot, rice bowls, lidded jars. That's a little teeny vase 2 inches high. I wish I had it. Oiled pitchers, olive oil. Serving dishes, planters, pots to use, sushi plates. A couple of years ago, I got, thanks to Jim Bailey, a brand new gas kiln, and I have not been able to get my red Shino to work, my ultra carbon trap Shino to work in this new kiln. So I beginning to work with combinations of other Shinos, white Shinos, and lots of different Shinos, and that's what these are. These are not my Shino. It's sort of a marble Shino that just came out of the last kiln that I fired. Elaine, are you here? This is the pot that's in the I Ching Museum unintentionally. Okay, I think that's it. From the beginning of, you want to clap? I just want to make sure you were still out there. Very quiet all of a sudden. I can't see anything. From the beginning of recorded time, humans have worked with clay to solve problems for food, for shelter, for storage, for cooking, the pursuit of beauty, and to make real the spirit world. Wonderful things have been done with just clay and fire. And it gives me goosebumps to go to the basement of the Freer Collection in Washington, D.C., and to actually hold that Jomon jar from 5,000 plus years ago. And in your hand, as you're holding, you can actually feel the marks of the maker's hand from 5,000 years ago. So this path that we travel goes way back. It goes back to the very beginning of human history. It goes back before the beginning of human history. From the Big Bang and the primordial ooze, the earth was formed and fermented as rocks became clay over eons of erosion, change, and weather. What a precious material, formed so very slowly over the millennia, and what a huge responsibility we have as clay workers to handle it with care and to use it with love. One of the people that responded to my question, my email about what difference does clay make anyway, was Mila Visotuf. She's a potter in Berkeley, can't be here this weekend. But she wrote this, and I want to share it with you because it really sums up what I've been trying, where I have come in this conversation with myself and with you. I feel tremendous satisfaction in the timelessness of clay. I see myself as being a part of a guild of sorts, a vocation that goes back farther than almost any other work in human history. Cavemen and women worked in clay. Hunter-gatherers worked in clay. Newly agricultural societies worked in clay. And I feel fortunate that I can step onto that path that so many anonymous men and women have walked before me. And I can feel a connection with them through the millennia. It makes me feel extremely grounded. At a time when our society changes so fast and technology sweeps us up and away from the comfortable and the familiar, our work in clay gives us a lifeline to the past. Your question, what difference does that clay make anyway, is one that I can't answer. Words don't come near. But when we get to the place beyond words, beyond explanation, beyond logic, that is perhaps where we find the answer or part of it, whether it be getting a glimpse of God or getting an answer to your question. When we sit at our wheel, when we work hour after hour after hour, and then we drop a just finished pot to smithereens on the floor, and we just go back, sit down, and make another. When we fire a kiln for 7 days and 7 nights, and only a few good pots come out of it, and we simply plan the next firing. When we spend our years perfecting our craft, knowing that our pay will be minimal. Maybe we are what the monks were in the Middle Ages, people completely devoted to reaching the unreachable. Maybe we are modern monks. Modern monks indeed. I don't know about that, but we do stand on the shoulders of those who went before us. Let us continue on that path, and let us offer up the very best that we have to make good work, honest work, work that comes from the heart. We've been given a gift as makers and as creators, as well as a challenge and a charge and a responsibility. We have a responsibility as clay workers to carry on the tradition, to continue the work, and to honor and treat the clay as it deserves to be treated, with honesty and with integrity, with respect and with love. Martin Luther King once said that our lives begin the day we become silent about things that matter. Let us not be silent. Let us speak out. Let us speak out about things that matter. We speak out with what we create with our hands and our hearts. Let's speak out about those things that matter, the soul of the culture, the spirit of our culture, and what it means to be human. This closing lecture is not a summary of a marvelous gathering here in Philadelphia, but a transition from here, this convention hall, to there, your studios, your homes, your shops, your schools. Consider this a call to get home, clean up those studios, wedge that clay, and get back to work. I am. Now it's your turn. Okay, did I go over? That was wonderful. That was awesome. No, it's perfect. I gotta sit down.
Malcolm Davis. We're not going to stop.
I all enjoyed listening to Malcolm's speech. I know that I really loved to get to know more about his journey and how he kind of became the ceramicist that he was. And so now I will hand things over to Shoji, who will talk about his work and Malcolm's legacy.
So, well, thank you for this invitation to speak tonight. And my name is Shoji Satake, and I'm the ceramics area head and the associate professor of art at West Virginia University. And I'm really honored by this opportunity. And I remember that talk in the Philadelphia NCECA conference like it was yesterday. I remember my students and I sat together excited to hear Malcolm, especially when they found, when many of them, that was the first time they had ever left West Virginia. And to realize the closing speaker was someone who actually worked in West Virginia, I think made it that much more special. And so I think I've watched this closing talk on numerous occasions. I show it to my students every year, and it resonates and inspires me today as it did when he said those words not so long ago. And also, what was so special for me at that Philadelphia NCECA conference was that it was the first time in 6 years I went as a member. The previous 6 years before that, I had been serving on the board of directors of NCECA. And so working on a lot of the behind the scenes things. And so to be able to go and enjoy that conference and attend all the symposium, the panels, the lectures, the demos, and to be able to sit and actually quietly enjoy Malcolm's talk was something very special. So but I do feel a little bit out of my element here. Like, how do you follow something like that, right? Like, which is so inspiring. And so, um, if we were meeting in person, right, and I was making the closing remarks, I mean, I could excuse and say I'm going to do this really quickly because the bars down the bar for the reception is down the other side of the hallway, and I'm the barrier in between all those things, and so that people would understand. But since we're meeting virtually, I'll try my best to make a few comments, and mine is pretty short, but I just wanted to make a few notes about Malcolm's legacy and the history of Shino, and then what we're doing with the project with Judy to celebrate Malcolm's legacy. And so long before I got to know Malcolm, the artist, the person, I knew Malcolm, right? But I knew Malcolm as Davis Shino, revised number 11. Davis Carvin Trap Shino, Malcolm Davis Shino number 3, textiles on walls after textiles on walls, 5-gallon buckets after 5-gallon buckets, and so on, right? So as Malcolm used to joke, right, like he did in that lecture, like his name was on a piece of duct tape taped to 5-gallon buckets more than probably any other person in the ceramics world, right? And so, and he was right then, he's still correct today. Through my career and my work that I do, I've been lucky enough to travel around the world to art centers, to ceramic places around the world, and I'm a witness to this phenomenon, right? I can verify that there are buckets with his name on it in all corners of the world in ceramic studios near and far, and it's actually kind of comforting to know, right, that Malcolm is like here, there, and everywhere, right? And so like that his spirit still is there and it resonates with us. And so it's certainly like, someone who travels a lot and who travels a lot by themselves, traveling can get lonely, but then to be able to walk into like a studio and see something so familiar. But to understand that history, I'm going to step us back a little bit, right? And so, and I just want to say that art is very much like a human-only endeavor, right? So no other creature on this planet makes something for the sake of beauty. Right? So I think most artists are compelled to make beautiful work, but it's really the special ones that inspire to help others create that beauty in their lives. And then the Malcolm I knew and remember was that person. He was not only a potter, but he was a teacher, and he was someone so inspirational, acted as a mentor, as a friend. And so that's why he was so loved, I think, throughout the world, and people loved going to his workshop and hearing him talk and seeing his work and owning his work. So his love of pottery and Shino glaze is a legacy that really still lives today. So, but as we step back, right, but to understand that history, you have to understand that Shino originated in the 16th century as one of Japan's very first early white glazes. It was made from local feldspar, which is a type of quartz. When fired, produced a white glaze with white sheen and subtle depth. And so, although there are several theories on the origins of the name Shino, which is really not known, Shino glazes were used in the ancient kiln sites of Mino and Seto in central Japan. And Seto Mino is one of the 6 ancient kiln sites of Japan, and it's the only kiln site of those 6 that focused on glazes. All the other 5 ancient kiln sites focused on the wood kiln and the wood ash effects on those pots, so they weren't glazed. So it was really the center of this research, and Shino is also one of Japan's indigenous first high-fired white glazed pottery. And then oftentimes you see like iron oxide brush markings as a decoration on that time. And before that time, they did a lot more carving, incising, or applique work. And one of the distinctive characteristics of Shino as a surface, as you can see like on this image on the right, is some of the small pinholes, right? In Japanese, it's called suana, which is holes, which the tea masters favored, and they also coined the term yuzuhada, or the citrus skin, or the orange peel look. And the Shino wares are often uses like the milky white ash feldspar glazes to be able to create that effect. And so the Shino glaze was one of the greatest achievements in this region during the Momoyama period, which was a short-lived period between 1573 and 1600, which carried on into the early Edo period. And this is also a time when there's a lot of political stability in Japan, as during that period, you have the unification of the Japan by all the feudal lords. And so it's unified under one military overlord overseeing the country for the emperor. And so there's a lot more political, about the political achievements and the advancements that happened, but also artistic, cultural. And this era also saw the emergence of the tea ceremony, which integrated the arts of ceramics as significant parts of the process, reflecting the artistic values of the tea masters. And many of the tea masters valued and used tea bowls glazed with Shino because it was an example of the culture surrounding the wabi-sabi, the perfection and the imperfection. And before that, as Judy had mentioned, a lot of the tea ceremony wares originally came from China, and they wanted to start using a lot more of the local pottery. And also there was some closing of ties during that time period. There was a period of war between Japan and the Chinese and the Korean Peninsula and so on. So the image on the right is of a Shino glazed chawan, the Japanese tea ceremony bowl, and it named Unohanagaki. And it's and oftentimes the tea masters who own these tea bowls will name them because they are so significant. And this is one of only 2 tea bowls made in Japan. And this is the only one made with the Shino glaze on it that's been designated as a national living treasure of Japan. So one of 2 Japanese tea bowls ever made that's been designated as a national living treasure is one that's made with the Shino glaze. And so you can talk about some of the historical significance of that. As you know, the Shino can be all sorts of different colors. And Shino then and now turns out in a variety of colors: white, orange, russet, brown, red, black. And the colors of these results depend on several factors, right? The thickness of glaze, how soon was it fired after it was applied? The glaze was applied, how was it dried? Where did it sit in the kiln, the type of clay, the biometric, the barometric pressure, the relative humidity. I've read that at least there are 16 variables including the type of water used to mix the glaze that can change the effects of the Shino glaze. So in the US, Warren Mackenzie is attributed with the most recent Shino revival and exploration. In 1974, he challenged a bunch of his grad students to recreate the traditional Shino glaze using minerals that were available in the US. And this was the advent of American Shino that facilitated this onslaught of experimentation with the glaze, with a lot of artistic revival, renewal of that glaze. And really, it was one of Warren's students, Virginia Wirt. And I'm sorry, I only have an image of the centerpiece. Of course, the left one is a Warren's piece, Warren's bottle. The center, the mug, the little cup, is a Virginia Wirt's glaze. And then it's Malcolm on the right, obviously, with Malcolm Shino glaze. And I'm sorry, I don't have an image of Virginia Wirt or actually one of Virginia's pots with her glaze on it, because incidentally, soon after she graduated with her MFA from University of Minnesota, she went to architecture school and became a very successful architect. And so she stopped making pots around 1979. And so she's basically credited for really formulating the recipe that included soda ash and spodumene. And her new recipe included that ideas of carbon trapping, which added depth to that new Shino. And this effect of the smoke or the organic materials from that clay body or the kiln fuel being trapped or put in a reduction firing environment in the glaze as it's melting helped create that results. And the results can be modeling, shadowing with lines that form the glaze and effects that are really somewhat elusive. And then Malcolm came shortly after and picked up and really advanced that research. Sorry, let me go back. I just have a few more things to say. And he really advanced the Shino glaze by adding red art and larger amounts of soda ash, and he added a lot of soda ash, right? In one of my conversations with me over at dinner in NCECA, he told me that when he was mixing like a batch of Shino glaze one day, he discovered he was out of spodumene. And then rather than putting off mixing the glaze, he decided to double up on the soda ash and really liked the result. And that's how a lot of the experimentation came about. And like the quote that's on the first image that I showed you, Malcolm's right. And then the Shino is a glaze that breaks all the rules. No other glaze varies so much depending on how it's applied, dried, fired. And Shinos are elusive and ephemeral. And it's all about the alchemy. And it really is. So, but Shino is also prized with being very stable. And it doesn't run when it's being fired, and that's the theory. And then as a professor who teaches ceramics, this means less stuff melting onto and messing up kiln shelves. So we love Shinos in the studio, right? But then there are other effects like carbon trapping, crawling, which are less consistent and often highly sought after for that reason, and can't get it all the time. And that's the trick. And to those who love Shino, this romance is real, right? It's a lot like Icarus chasing the sun, right? It's consumed by what they achieved once in the kiln, and they spend the rest of their career trying to recreate it. And oftentimes you can't. Even like as Malcolm said, that once he got that new Bailey kiln after his fire, it was really hard to use those red Shinos to get the effects he was getting. And then ironically, now we own that kiln. And then our students are also having a hard time getting that red Shino in that kiln. But for most part, Malcolm did achieve a lot of those heights during his career. That's why we have all this beautiful work. So with other glazes and techniques, the kiln is useful for firing and finishing that pottery. And with the Shino glazes, the kiln becomes more of a design tool, right? So glaze color texture is affected by all those things, whether or not using gas, oxygen, propane, electric, the firing temperatures, and so on can change all those variable outcomes. And so, right, so that's like one of the frustrations working with Shino. But if you can master it, it can be one of those like every aha moment every time you open the kiln when you see, it's like being a kid in the candy store, right? And so before I move on to our involvement through West Virginia University, I want to take this time to acknowledge and applaud the artists featured and inspired by Malcolm's passion for Shino, because these works in the exhibition show evidence of the experimentations with that temperamental yet romantic and most evocative of all glazes. And so at this point, you might be wondering why I've been honored with speaking to you on such a special evening, right? And so, well, aside from my appreciation to the contribution that Malcolm made to the world of ceramics, I had the fortune of knowing Malcolm, which grew over time. And the first time I was able to spend any significant amount of time with him was in Alaska, of all places. He was up there doing a workshop with Jeff Astrike at this place called Halibut Cove. And on his return to Anchorage, he was staying with a friend of mine named Os Matsutani, and they were having dinner there. And then Os knew that I had been out netting for I was out netting salmon, and then thought that it might be great to be able to see if I could convince me to come over and bring some of the salmon over for a barbecue. And then when he told me who was there, I instantly grabbed all the salmon we had in our coolers that we had just come back from fishing and brought it over, and we were able to have this great dinner party. And from that, moving to West Virginia and knowing that Malcolm was there, and then my involvement with NCECA helped grow this relationship. And And then, his studio in Tolmansville, West Virginia was about a quick hour-and-a-half drive south of us in Morgantown. And so we always talked about having him conduct workshops, even crits, just friendly visit, but with his busy schedule, working all summer at the studio, then traveling in the late fall to early spring to his workshops and demos, we always said that the timing just never really worked out. And since we were so close to one another, it was always this thought that we would work something out in the future. And I think that's been my biggest regret in knowing Malcolm, that we really missed this opportunity to celebrate whom I always considered was one of West Virginia's greatest potters. And so we're delighted to be working with Judy to celebrate Malcolm's legacy. And so with Malcolm's untimely passing, we began to work with Judy about how to celebrate his life, especially through our university and our museum. And so with Judy's generous support, we started the Malcolm Davis Living Legacy Fund for Ceramics, which has funded 2 graduate students so far in assistantships that began in 2019 and will continue through this upcoming academic year. And the selected graduate students, they study, they work, they document Malcolm's tests and catalog glaze recipes, preparing online resources, and is helping to help assist in the publication of a retrospect tribute to Malcolm. And as Malcolm, West Virginia is the repository of Malcolm's research at our History Center, we've been trying to document all that stuff. And the images here are some of the example things I've been working on that is being beta tested right now. And these are some of the glaze recipes that we've been testing and some examples of that. And then like the recipe that we put together, and these will be available online, hopefully in the coming months. And then it'll be free for anyone to research Malcolm's work. And so as part of that, we're also having a retrospect tribute to Malcolm Davis at our art museum. And it will be from January through May in 2022. And you guys are all invited to come. And I'll send more information as the dates are penned and finalized. And right now, the university just made an announcement about reopening fully, so that we're starting to pen down the dates. And then, so anyways, congratulations Sandy Springs and everyone that's involved with the show, and then all the artists and the juror, and then a special thanks to Judy for allowing me to talk about this and kind of indulge about our project at WVU. And so thanks for the opportunity, and that's what I have for today.
So much, Shoji, for talking about what you do and giving us some more context and background about Shino. We appreciate your time and your knowledge. I know we ran a little bit late, so I'd like to thank everyone for sticking around and sticking with us. And before we sign off, I just wanted to give people the opportunity to ask any questions they might have, either to Shoji about what he's talked about or about the exhibit. Right. Well, I'll just give a quick little thing about what's kind of coming up in the show. Our next virtual event, if you all are interested in learning more about Shino, we have a panel discussion July 11th at 5 p.m. You can register through our website, and that will be on Shino and the kind of many uses and variations of it. And we hope that if you haven't already, you all can find a time to make it out to the show and see it in person. It'll be up through September 5th. All right. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you in the future.